All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're looking at color study.
Oh, yeah, color studies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we were inspired by this YouTube video. It's called Why Color Studies Are So Powerful
Hmm.
by Lighting Mentor.
Yeah.
And, I have to admit, I always thought color studies were kind of, like, oh, you're just painting a bowl of fruit.
Yeah.
But this video actually, I don't know, kind of opened my eyes to how much deeper it can be.
Yeah, I think it really gets at like the essence of how we see things, right?
Yeah.
It's training your brain to really like look at the world and understand how light and shadow and color all interact.
The thing that struck me was they mentioned Pixar artists
Oh, wow.
and how they do weekly color studies, and they'll use things like, crumpled up pieces of paper or sugar cubes.
Really?
Yeah, it's like you think, oh, they're these animation wizards.
Right.
They're using, the latest technology, but there's a reason why they go back to those basics.
I mean, it makes sense, though. It's like if you strip away all the detail and all the fancy tools, it's like you're forced to really focus on that relationship between light and color, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's like a workout, like a mental workout for your eyes.
It makes me think about like those optical illusions where, you look at something and it looks like one thing.
Right.
And then suddenly your brain kind of flips it and you see it in a completely different way.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like color studies are training you to like control that flip.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And I think it really highlights that, there's that analytical side of art and then there's the intuitive side. And I think color studies really help train that intuitive side.
So the video talks about this idea of deep observation.
Oh, yeah.
Which sounds, very Zen, but what does that actually mean in the context of art?
Yeah, so I think it's more about like active seeing, right, versus just passively looking. So it's like when you're looking at something, you're really trying to like engage with it and ask questions, like where's the light coming from? How's it affecting the colors? How are the shadows shaping, the form? What happens to the colors when they're, next to each other?
It's like turning your brain into a detective almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Like searching for clues about how light and color are behaving.
Exactly. And the more you practice that, the more you start to pick up on these little subtle details that most people, just wouldn't even notice.
The next thing the video talks about is the power of copying. And I have to admit, I always thought copying was like a bad word in art, like it was cheating.
Right.
But he actually makes a really good point. It's a time-honored tradition. I mean, it's something that master artists have been doing for centuries.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Think about all the Renaissance artists who were copying the masters. Or even today, you see artists in the Louvre, they're setting up their easels and they're copying these paintings.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's not about like just making an exact replica. It's about understanding the choices that the artist made, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about understanding like, okay, why did they use this color? Why did they put the light here and the shadow there?
It's almost like, like reverse engineering.
Right, exactly. Like you're trying to figure out, okay, how did they actually do this?
So it's okay to steal techniques.
I think it's not even stealing. It's more like learning. You're learning from the best.
So we've talked about the why of color studies. Let's talk about the how. The video really emphasizes starting with simple objects. Why is that so important?
I think it's to avoid visual overload, right? Like if you're just starting out and you try to do something too complex, it's just, it's too much. It's like trying to learn a new language and you pick up like War and Peace, as your first book.
Right.
It's too much. So a simple object, like, he uses the example of an egg, just something simple so you can really focus on those elements of light and shadow.
Yeah. So it's like learning your alphabet before you try to write a novel.
Exactly.
And speaking of those simple objects, the video highlights some specific examples.
Okay.
One is an egg in sunlight. Mm-hmm. Another one is an apple on a table versus an apple on a carpet.
Interesting.
And then a salt lamp. What makes these such good starting points?
So each of those examples is really isolating a specific, aspect of light and color, right? So the egg in the sunlight, it's really about how light kind of wraps around a curved surface. Mm. And then the apple on the table versus the apple on the carpet.
Yep.
It's showing you how the environment really affects color because, an apple on a table is going to have different reflections than an apple on a carpet.
Yeah, it's going to cast different shadows too.
Right, exactly. So it's all relative, right?
Yeah. And then the salt lamp, that's all about exploring different light sources, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So the warm glow of a salt lamp is going to create a very different mood and color palette than, natural daylight.
Oh.
And that brings us to the concept of color temperature,
Okay.
which is, it's a fascinating topic because it affects not just how we see things, but also how we feel about them.
Oh, okay, so color temperature. I feel like I've heard that term thrown around,
Yeah.
but I don't really understand it.
So in the simplest terms, you have warm light sources. So
Mhm.
these are things like, incandescent bulbs, candlelight. They tend to cast a yellowish or a reddish glow, and it creates a sense of warmth and coziness.
Okay.
And then you have cool light sources.
Mm.
So these are things like, fluorescent lights, overcast daylight. They tend to cast a more bluish or greenish light. And it can feel more sterile or even melancholic, right?
It's amazing how much we take for granted when it comes to, like, observing light and color.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's never too late to start paying attention. And that's what we're going to delve into in the next part of this deep dive. We'll explore some practical techniques for capturing these nuances of light and color in your own color studies.
Sounds good. Back again for more on color studies. Last time, we were talking about why they're so powerful.
Right, that foundation.
Now I kind of want to get into, how to actually do them.
Yeah, the hands-on part.
Yeah. Where do you even begin?
Well, it's funny. The most important part is actually choosing what to study.
Oh, okay.
And that's where a lot of people, I think, trip up,
Yeah.
They want to do something super complicated, like right away, like, oh, it has to be this big, elaborate thing to be art.
Yeah.
But really, the beauty's in keeping it simple.
The video we were talking about why color studies are so powerful actually, warned against starting with a really cluttered scene. Why is that?
It's kind of like, imagine learning piano, right?
Okay.
And you sit down, and your first song is like Rachmaninoff.
Right.
You'd be so overwhelmed, you'd probably just quit.
Yeah.
Color studies are kind of the same way. If you jump into a scene with tons of objects and different textures and crazy light, it's just too much for your brain to handle when you're still trying to train your eye to see those subtle color relationships.
So how do you actually, approach that simple object then? What are you looking for?
Well, that's where the deep observation comes in, really actively looking. And a good way to start is just ask yourself questions.
Okay.
Like, where's the light coming from? Is it harsh? Is it soft? What are the shadows doing? Are they sharp? Are they blurry? And then the really fun part, how do the colors of the object change because of all this?
So it's not just like, oh, that's a red apple.
Right.
It's more like, well, the light's hitting this side and it's making the red kind of look orange, but in the shadow it almost looks purple.
Exactly. Yeah. You're seeing it as a relationship, It's
Yeah.
not just a fixed color. Here's a trick.
Okay.
Try squinting at your subject.
Isn't that bad for your eyes?
No, it's a real art technique.
Okay.
What it does is it kind of reduces the amount of visual info your brain's trying to process all at once.
Okay.
It's like turning down the noise so you can hear the melody better. And then you'll see those subtle changes in color way more easily.
So let's say you have your simple object, you're squinting. What about tools?
The great thing about color studies is you can really use anything you're comfy with.
Okay.
So digital, traditional paints, colored pencils, whatever. The point is training your eye.
So I don't need to go out and buy, a whole new set of super fancy art supplies.
Nope. Remember those Pixar artists? Crumpled paper, sugar cubes?
Right.
It's about principles, not fancy stuff.
One thing I thought was interesting, the video talked about how doing color studies can help you develop your own style.
Yeah.
But how does that happen if you're copying?
Mm-hmm.
You'd think you'd just become more like whoever you're studying.
It's kind of like learning to cook, right?
Okay.
You start by following recipes exactly. But then, as you get comfortable, you start experimenting. You change an ingredient, you adjust the seasoning, you might even make up your own dish based on what you've learned. Color studies are similar. You start copying to learn the basics. But as you understand those principles, you'll naturally make your own choices. Like maybe you love bold, contrasting colors. Or maybe you prefer a more subtle, muted look. It becomes your own visual language.
So even if someone doesn't consider themselves an artist, color studies can still be helpful.
Absolutely. It's about appreciating the visual world.
Mm-hmm.
So training your eye to see those nuances of light and color makes you notice beauty in everyday things you might have missed before.
It's like you're suddenly seeing all this extra visual information that was always there.
It's like a superpower.
I like that.
And it can affect so many other things in your life, too. How you decorate, how you take photos, even how you look at people.
Let's talk about stealing techniques, which the video kind of encourages. How can we learn from others without just straight up copying?
It's about understanding the why. behind what they did. So when you're looking at, say, a painting by a master, don't just focus on the final product. Think about their process. What colors did they choose? How did they use light and shadow? What techniques did they use for texture? By analyzing those things, you learn how they were thinking, and then you can adapt that to your own work.
So it's like figuring out the recipe, not just tasting the dish.
Exactly. And as you study more artists, more styles, you build up your own artistic vocabulary. You can mix and match, experiment, and eventually you create something totally your own.
So wrapping up, what are some key things for our listeners to keep in mind if they want to try color studies?
Don't overthink it. Start simple. Use whatever materials you like, and just focus on observing the light and color you see every day.
Yeah.
The goal isn't perfection. It's training your eye.
And don't be afraid to try things out.
Right.
Different light, different colors, have fun with it.
Exactly. Color studies are a journey. You're always learning and seeing things in new ways. So keep exploring. Keep being creative.
I feel like I'm already seeing the world differently after all this. Stick around, though, because in the last part, we'll bring everything together and talk about how color studies can really unlock your creativity.
Wow. So this deep dive into color studies has really been, well, eye-opening, to say the least. I feel like I'm seeing the world in a whole new light.
It's amazing, isn't it, how something so seemingly simple can unlock so much understanding about, how we perceive the world visually. It's this blend of science and art that I find so fascinating.
One of the things that's really stuck with me is that color studies aren't just for artists, right? Like anyone can benefit from this practice. It's about cultivating a deeper appreciation for, well, for the world around us, I guess.
Exactly. It's about training your eye to see those subtle nuances, the interplay of light and shadow, the way colors interact with each other. It's like you're suddenly aware of a whole visual language that you maybe didn't even know existed before. I keep thinking back to that video we've been discussing, why color studies are so powerful. I really appreciated how Lighting Mentor emphasized the importance of starting small, like don't feel pressured to tackle these grand, complex scenes right away.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to get overwhelmed, especially when you're first starting out. So beginning with simple objects, really focusing on those fundamental principles, it allows you to build a solid foundation without feeling like you're in over your head.
It's like those Pixar artists we talked about earlier, using crumpled paper and sugar cubes. It's a great reminder that you don't need fancy tools or elaborate setups to learn and grow as an artist.
Right. Sometimes limitations can actually spark creativity in ways we wouldn't expect. It forces us to be more resourceful, more innovative in how we approach a subject.
And speaking of creativity, I loved how the video talked about color studies as a pathway to developing your own unique style. It seems counterintuitive that copying could lead to more originality, but the more we discussed it, the more it made sense.
Yeah, I get that. It's like if you're copying, how can you be original? But it's not about just blindly mimicking what you see. It's about studying the masters, understanding their techniques, deconstructing their choices, and then using that knowledge as a springboard to create something that's truly your own.
It's like learning the rules of grammar before you can write poetry, or understanding musical scales before you can compose a symphony. You need that foundation to really be able to express yourself.
I like that analogy. It's about taking those building blocks and then using them to create something new, something uniquely you.
So even if it's like you've unlocked a hidden dimension of visual information. It's always been there, but now you're finally attuned to it.
And that awareness, that appreciation, it can permeate other areas of your life too. The way you decorate your home, the way you compose a photograph, even the way you interact with people. It's about bringing that same level of attention and mindfulness to everything you do.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember about color studies?
I think it's this. Don't be afraid to explore, to experiment. Start small, keep it simple, and just enjoy the process of observing and learning. Color studies are a journey of discovery, and there's no right or wrong way to approach them.
That's a great point. It's about embracing the process, the joy of learning and experimenting. And who knows, you might even surprise yourself with what you create along the way. Well, thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of color studies. We hope you've been inspired to pick up a brush, a pencil, or even just your phone camera and start exploring the beauty of light and color in your own unique way.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Until next time, keep those creative juices flowing.